Keys in modern day DBD are often overlooked, and frankly, for good reason. By themselves, they only have one single niche use, opening the hatch. And the most common one, the broken key, doesn't even do that. Don't get me wrong, opening the hatch is an extremely powerful effect, but with all the specific conditions surrounding the hatch, it can be surprisingly uncommon to actually get any use of this feature at all. For starters, for the hatch to even spawn, there can only be one remaining survivor left in the match, so the person with the key has to have had all their teammates die before them. Let's say the last person alive does happen to have a key and they stumble across the hatch. Well, it spawns already open, so that's another prerequisite. Okay, let's say the last survivor alive has a key and the killer closed the hatch. Well, the hatch no longer makes its loud whooshing sound when it's closed, so good luck finding it without left behind. But that means you're bringing an item and a perk solely dedicated to using a key on the hatch in the event that all these conditions are met, when in reality it would be much better to just bring a better item like a toolbox, medkit or flashlight and play towards winning the game properly with your teammates included. But all of that's without add-ons. With add-ons, keys are surprisingly useful and incredibly undervalued by the player base, with add-ons like Blood Amber allowing the survivor to see the killer's aura on command, effectively just granting wall hacks and guaranteeing they'd win every single mind game, or Gold Token, which is literally an entire perk rolled up into an add-on. That perk being Bond, but get this, a buffed version of Bond, being 48 meters instead of Bond's usual 36 meter range. Granted, people are slowly becoming a bit more aware of the power of these add-ons thanks to people like JRM making videos pointing out just how good they really are. Just like I can point out how good today's sponsor is. War Thunder. It's one of the most extensive vehicle combat games available on the market and is out now for free on both PC and consoles. When I say extensive, I mean it. With over 2,500 vehicles from 10 different nations, variety is king, with tanks, ships, helicopters, planes, biplanes and armoured cars of the early 1900s, all the way to modern vehicles like jets, complete with customization too. There's multiple game modes to accommodate everyone's tastes, varying from fast-paced arcadey action to a gritty realism mode. Each vehicle is recreated with care, with detailed graphics and powerful sound effects to fully immerse you in the combat, alongside a realistic damage system that reflects what damage you've actually taken. With a community over 70 million players deep, there's no better time than now to join in on the PvP action. War Thunder is free for PC, Xbox and PlayStation, and if you sign up using my link in the description, new and returning players who haven't played in 6 months get a huge bonus of premium vehicles, the exclusive Eagle of Valor vehicle decor, 100,000 silver lions, 7 days of premium and much more. There's a decent chance that a lot of the reason people don't value keys is mostly skill issue, as most of the player base finds it difficult to look around during chases and can only run while looking forward, so no looking around means no attempt at mind games, and therefore no value from being guaranteed to win those non-existent mind games. Aside from skill issue for the aura add-ons and the extremely niche use of opening the hatch, I do think there's a third reason for people giving keys the cold shoulder, and that is just how hard they fell from grace. Yes, they are still good now, but they were absolutely ridiculous back in the day, so for anyone who saw them in their prime and witnessed them fall to where they are now, they likely consider them dead. And just how far exactly did they fall? Let's take it all the way back to Friday the 23rd of September 2016 in patch 1.1.2, where 8 new items were added to DBD. The red map, the brown, green and purple medkits, the green and purple flashlights, alongside the broken key and the dull key. Up until this point, there was only one of each item in DBD, and while it was simple, easy to understand and got the job done, there wasn't really much variety. So the addition of stronger and weaker variations of the items was intended to spice things up and keep things feeling fresh. And spice things up they most certainly did in the flashlight department, which I made an entire video about linked below, but the key game was still mostly the same as before the 2 new ones were added, and the keys, alongside the hatch, functioned completely differently to what you're used to nowadays. So, How exactly were keys in the hatch so OP compared to now? Well, for starters, what if I told you that the hatch wasn't limited to only one person escaping through it? Perchance, 2 people could jump out through the hatch, even with multiple gens still left unrepaired. No, don't be silly. In fact, all 4 survivors could escape through the hatch off of just one single key. If anybody dares to tell you that old DBD was better than modern DBD, then they are a bold-faced liar, because this is about to get outright bonkers. I mentioned how the auras on keys are what's valuable nowadays, but back then, people couldn't have cared less about the auras. What made keys absolutely insane was purely the hatch unlocking ability, paired with the ridiculous ways of actually getting the hatch into play. The only real difference from keys themselves was that the unlock hatch interaction was straight up instant, and there wasn't a little bar to fill up like there is nowadays. But the bar does fill up very quickly, so that's not a huge difference. The ability to unlock the hatch relies on, well, the hatch, which was almost unrecognizable compared to today's version. A bit more confusing to understand, but incredibly more powerful. Spawning the hatch today is very simple. When there is only one survivor left, the hatch spawns pre-opened. The old one instead spawned using a mathematical formula and would be closed upon spawning. You may be wondering how on earth a closed hatch could be OP, but upon learning this cryptic formula, the picture becomes very clear. The formula is very high level scientist type stuff, but it goes a bit like this. Number of survivors alive plus 1. That's how many generators the survivors would have to repair for the hatch to spawn in. Incredibly confusing, I know. So if 2 survivors were alive, then the hatch would spawn once 3 generators were completed. If 3 survivors were alive, then the hatch would spawn once 4 generators were completed, and so on. For some reason, a lot of people just couldn't wrap their heads around that back in the day, no matter how many times you explained it to them. Goes to show the brain power most players are working with, I guess. From here, all they had to do was find where the hatch spawned, insta-open it, and boom, multiple survivors could escape from the match without even finishing the gens. And guess what? There was no way for killers to close the hatch back then. Even if the killer managed to locate the hatch once the survivors opened it, the only way for it to close again was waiting out the timer to which it would automatically close, which was a whopping 30 seconds. What this meant is that survivors didn't have to win to win. Imagine being a killer back then. You've already killed 1 survivor, the other 3 are all on death hook, and there's still a gen left, and you're in hot pursuit of one of them, when all of a sudden, boom, the other 2 survivors just escape for free, and it's only a matter of time until this last survivor finds the open hatch too. Just like that, you are on track for a 4K and you end up with a 1K, with absolutely nothing you could have done about it. While there was no way of the killer closing the hatch, there was one method of defense that killers used to have, which has since been removed from the game: hatch grabs. By pressing the attack button while the survivor was mid-air jumping through the hatch, the killer could grab them, instantly putting them on the killer's shoulder ready to be hooked. However, survivors also had their own defense against the killer's defense, which ended up leading to stalemates, which the community better knew them as the infamous hatch standoffs, one of the worst, most miserable parts of DBD's gameplay. While killers were able to grab survivors midway through the jump animation, survivors knew this, and so they could just not jump until it was safe. If the killer was stuck in an action animation, such as wiping their weapon after hitting a survivor, they were unable to perform a grab until the animation was over, so survivors wouldn't jump through until the killer hit them first. This meant that whoever made the first move loses the hatch standoff. If the survivor jumps first, the killer will grab them. If the killer swings first, the survivor will jump while the killer's locked in an animation. So both the killer and the survivor would stand next to the hatch staring at each other, hoping the other person would get bored first and just give up. Insta-downs didn't help either, as survivors could still crawl through while slugged. In the event that survivors opened the hatch early with gens still remaining, normally they'd all round each other up first and jump through together before the killer even realizes what's happening. But on the rare occasion that one person jumped through the hatch alone, abandoning their remaining teammates, the killer had a choice: stand there and camp the hatch for the full 30 seconds until it closed so that no survivor would dare to jump out, or continue patrolling gens and just hope that the remaining survivors don't find the open, unguarded hatch. Truth be told, this was lose-lose for the killer. Camp the hatch and the survivors will see you stood there, so they'll just turn around and go do the remaining gens while you're effectively AFK. If you don't camp the hatch, then there's a chance the survivors will find it and instantly escape for free. Realistically speaking, if anybody opened the hatch early at any point in the match, the entire game was effectively lost for the killer with just about nothing they could have done about it. But that's only if the hatch was opened early. There was also still a backup hatch option that's more similar to the modern day hatch mechanic that was also paired alongside everything I just mentioned. The hatch would also spawn and automatically open for the last remaining survivor as long as 2 gens had been done at any point in the match, and would remain open forever. There was no 30-second timer, there was no timer at all in fact, no endgame collapse, no way for the killer to close it, nothing. If a hatch standoff occurred at this point, it was literally just a case of who got bored first. Both the killer and the survivor would sit there staring at each other, unwilling to make the first move, with no goal, timer, or restriction at all. This led to people literally standing still for 10 to 15 minutes at a time daily, refusing to give up their win, and some particularly determined players took part in hatch standoffs that lasted for hours. That's right, Dead by Daylight genuinely had a core mechanic that led to players on both teams going AFK for hours at a time to secure their win. Old DBD was better, eh? There were even instances where people just straight up watched a movie during a hatch standoff, not even looking at the screen anymore. And the other person still didn't make the first move because for all they knew, their opponent was sat there waiting for the moment to strike. I'd imagine there were also instances where neither player was even at their screen anymore, and neither had a way of knowing that it was safe to claim their win. But why did people sit there for hours during hatch standoffs? Survivor players justified it saying, "I've gotten lucky, I found the hatch opens for the last survivor so they have a chance to get out, it's not often that I do find the hatch, so just let me have my escape." Whereas killer players justified it with the opposite, saying, "Exactly, you got lucky, why should I lose my win just because of RNG? I worked hard to win this match, I'm not pissing it away for free." In its simplest form, it was a sense of entitlement from either side that just ended up becoming a battle of the egos. If you've watched my other videos, you would also know that back then the game was incredibly survivor-sided. Pallet counts reaching the 30s, infinite loops, exhaustion recovered while sprinting, brand new parts literally completed an entire generator instantly, original decisive strike was a literal 4th life, original borrowed time was a literal 3rd health state, instablinds were, as the name implies, instant and uncounterable, as Lightborn didn't completely block flashlight blinding like it does nowadays. Survivors could straight up teleport like the nurse, so objectively speaking, you'd have to be an outright liar to claim that survivors didn't have it easy back then. And the hatch spawning for the last survivor, while being completely unclosable, was just a final slap in the face to any killer who managed to beat the odds and kill 3 of the 4 survivors. While I started this video with patch 1.1.2, this stuff had been going on since literally the day DBD released on patch 1.0.0, as the skeleton key was in the game from day 1, and the hatch mechanic was also in the game from day 1. Needless to say, the community as a whole, but especially killer players, begged and pleaded with Behaviour to do something about the ridiculous hatch mechanics. It goes without saying, no game should have a feature that causes players to go AFK for hours at a time. It doesn't take a genius to figure it out, things needed to change. And now it's time to play Disorderly Behaviour. Guess the answer to this question to win the chance to subscribe to the channel. And the question is, how long did it take Behaviour to make any changes at all to the hatch and key mechanics? Was it A, 2 weeks, B, 3 months, C, 1 year, D, 3 years? If you chose answer D, 3 years, then you're our lucky winner. It wasn't until the 7th of May 2019 in patch 2.7.0 where the hatch and keys were reworked to become what we're familiar with today, alongside the introduction of the endgame collapse, a mechanic designed to stop hostage taking scenarios and force survivors to hurry up and get out, which also brought on its own controversy as the devs said this was supposed to slow the game down and address the rampant, for lack of a better word, gen rushing that was making Killer borderline unplayable. And did the literal timer that forces survivors to hurry up slow down gens at all? No, it bloody didn't. but there was no denying that the hatch was much fairer now. It was only a final chance for the last survivor and no longer gave entire teams a chance to escape without doing the gens, which is much fairer. Once again, War Thunder is available for free on PC, Xbox and PlayStation. Install now using the link in the description for a huge bonus pack, available for both new players and ones returning from a 6-month break. The old keys were way too strong and straight up gave away free wins, but do you think some changes are needed for the current keys? While they are genuinely useful, most of the player base doesn't seem particularly interested in them, so perhaps they could change them slightly to be more interesting. Let me know your ideas in the comments.